Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 257.
Wow.
I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com. We're excited to have back with us the talented and internationally acclaimed comic creator, Andre Owens.
Hey, Barney, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. I like to be internationally acclaimed. I like that.
It's true. It's true. Yeah.
Well, I guess it is true to an extent, but it's a nice thing to hear.
And so now you're here with this gigantic, epic,
yes,
230 page graphic
novel. Over 20 years in the making.
Chronicles.
Omegan
20 years in the making. Yes,
over 20 years in the making. And honestly, if you go back to when I first created the lead character, Francisco the Super Green, it's back to when I was a kid. So, probably 40 years ago, 45 years ago that the character was originally created. So,
right.
Yes, it's one of those things. It's one of my lifelong, projects, and I finally got it done, and I'm anxious to get it to people's hands. We're doing great with it so far. It's sold out at the first convention I went to. I'm having sales on my on my site, so things are going good. I just getting ready to submit to Diamond for distribution, so hopefully we'll get through that and get it out to all the comic book stores around the country.
And people can go now. They can go to Hero Unlimited,
right where you've got on screen. That's the site right there. You can all you have to do is click Add to Cart, and the order will go right to me, and I'll make sure you get your book right out to you.
Right, and so it's for those that are listening online. It's Hero HIRO Unlimited.com.
Right, make sure you get it right. It's HIRO.
Right, HIRO.
Yes.
Right.
Did I say my old cat?
H-E-R-O?
No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Okay. I'm always. It's reflexive of me to always correct that. So
okay. Yeah. So definitely check that out. And I know that you've been on the show. You're a friend of the show. This is your fourth time being on here. Yeah. And so for those that are interested, it's like you were here talking about the Bovine League before, talking about Force Galaxia.
Yes.
And one of the things that you always brought up in your previous interviews you were on, you was talking about you kind of had the shared universe aspect in certain extent. So does the Omegan Chronicles fit within?
It sure does. Extended? Yeah, it sure does. Well, see, originally Omegan Chronicles, if you go to my whole history of it, there was a book called Force Galaxia, was the first book I did, which is an anthology, which all the stories are interrelated. And Omegan Chronicles was part of that. So I serialized the first two chapters of Omegan Chronicles that you'll see in the graphic novel. Those book stories were serialized in Force Galaxia. But my original intention when I first came up with doing comics in the late 90s, when I got tired of working as a DP, I wanted to do Omegan Chronicles as a standalone graphic novel. But then it's something along the way changed. I got other ideas. When you're creative, you're like, oh man, I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do this like that. And I'm so ADHD that I, flipped out and just figured out to just do an anthology of Force Galaxia and put Omegan Chronicles in that. But then somewhere along the lines, I was like, man, I just want to, have a big graphic novel to sell. And I'd had some art, I had the artwork ready for chapters 3 and 4 of Omegan Chronicles. And I said, well, let me just produce chapters 5 and 6 and put it together as one full graphic novel.
Okay. And so you have 5 different artists for this?
Yeah, there's many artists that worked on it. So the first artist was a guy named Rodolfo Hernandez. He's a guy out of Caracas, of Venezuela. And I met him back in the day. I mean, this was the infancy of the internet when I first started doing this stuff. So, it was it wasn't like today where you can just go to Facebook or Instagram, where you can just find artists and see the great artwork just there. It was like, searching out for people who could really do the artwork. And at the time, there was a website called digitalwebbing.com. I believe it probably still exists. I just haven't been there in a long time. But there was artists that would post there. So I found this guy, Rodolfo Hernandez, through there. And, I hired him. And it was such a long time ago, he had to physically send me the pencil pages in the mail. There was no scanning and sending them, digitalized. So I would get all those pages back, and then I would send them to an inker that I discovered in Mexico City that would ink all the pages, and he'd have to mail them back to me. And then finally, I would scan them in back then, with a big scanner, and send the colors and the colors to letter, and that's the rest of this.
Yeah, just checked it out. Digitalwebbing.com still exists.
Around. There it is.
Still exists.
So exactly. So that was a great place. They used to a lot of creators used to be there. I don't know who goes there now, if any, but I used to discover a lot of talent there. producing comics isn't cheap, and if you're especially if you're not the artist, you have to pay artists. So there was a gap there for a while where I didn't do any pages, and I lost track of Rodolfo. And when I decided to start picking the pages up again, I needed a new artist, and I met Gabe Pena. Now I don't remember where Gabe and I met. I don't know if it was on Facebook. I think it was before Facebook. So I'm not sure. Maybe we may have met on digital webbing also. I forget where we met, but yeah, definitely was before Facebook because it was like 2006. I met him at a comic book convention, and he had been working with me since 2004. So I'm not sure. So anyway, I forget where I met Gabe, but then he worked on it for a while. Once again, another, I had more financial difficulties, so I had to wait to make more pages. So then I discovered Ruli Akbar through Facebook, actually, through a site called Connecting Writers and Artists. And and I discovered him there. We really clicked, and he was able to, get on the same page as I was about the tone of the story I wanted to tell. And he finished out the book, and I think it's turned out great. I mean, here's a copy of it right now, the actual graphic novel.
Okay, so, let me get. All right. Wow, that is huge.
Yeah, 220 in the backside.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I'm very proud of it. It's one of those things I've been working my whole life to get done.
Right.
So I'm very proud that I've gotten it accomplished, and it hopefully it wouldn't take me another 20 years to do the next book. I'd like to do because I'm not a young man, but I have 2 follow-up graphic novels to this that I like to produce that I've gotten. I've written the second one on about half of it, which would be called Omegan Wars, and then the third book would be called Omegan Inferno. So,
oh wow, okay,
yeah. So that's the long-term plan for this particular IP.
Okay. And so, but you're gonna, for the other ones, they're gonna always be graphic novels?
Yeah, I think so. At this point, that's what I want to do, is always make them graphic novels and try to keep around the same page length, or a little more, a little less. Yeah, and the cover of the book is by a guy named Max Bertolini, and I met Max on Facebook also. He's out of Italy.
That's a gorgeous cover.
Yeah, he's a fantastic artist.
Right. Now, talk to us a little bit about what's the age range for this.
Oh, it's an all ages book, so it's it's 8 to and up. I mean 10 and up. It's there's nothing there's violence, but it's no more violent than any other book you're going to see on the market. There may be a few curse words. You may get a damn or the S word, I believe, maybe in there, but there's no F bombs or anything like that dropped throughout. It's a fun ride. What it was is Omegan Chronicles is the story I wanted to tell since I was a kid, about like a black superhero going on like a quest tale, like a Lord of the Rings, or like David Eddings' Belgariad series quest. And this was my version of that. Okay.
And so talk to us a little bit about how this fits in for some of your readers that might know a bit about, like, say, the Bovine League or Sisters of Power. How does this takes place?
Okay, so the Bovine League is the goal of the Bovine League series is a 6-issue series. We're in issue 2 right now, being produced. Omegan Chronicles takes place shortly after the end of the Bovine League series. So it would be the most newest book within the story, within my universe. Right. So it starts off. My universe starts off with Super Green 14, which is about Francisco the Super Green, who's the star of Omegan Chronicles, but it's about when he was a teenager, a 14-year-old. Right. So it stretches from there to the point where he is now, where he's in his mid-50s. So it's, his lifespan is the lifespan of the entire Hero Unlimited universe.
And so, and where does Sisters of Power fit within this?
It fits right here at the end. So it's part, especially because we Sisters of Power was originally in Omega and Force Galaxia also. It was originally syndicated in that. But I always loved the property, but I thought the characters were looking a little dated. They were first created in the late 90s, and I decided I wanted to reboot them. And I found a new artist, in the middle there, Cesar Mora. The first issue was co-written with my friend John Crosby. I think we appeared together. I'm not sure if we did.
Right.
Yeah. So John and I, So John was my co-writer on that. Now, subsequently, I've given up the writing duties of this, and we hired a great new writer. Her name is Isis Climbs. And her and John have written issue 2. So right now it's just Sisters of Power is backed up in my queue of books I'm going to do on Kickstarter. So
cool.
Yeah, so like right now, like my next book I'm gonna do on Kickstarter is probably this summer. It's about to be for Bovine League 2. Even though I've got a lot of the artwork already, the artist already working on it, he's done a lot of the pages. I just want to get enough money to finish them off so we can, so I'm trying to at least release a book a year.
What's the drive that you have for continuing this?
I got these stories inside of me. You know what I mean? It's like I've got these stories I want to tell, and I've got these stories about different things I want to tell them about. Like the last story was about Hollywood offenders. We didn't make our minimum for Kickstarter, so we haven't produced that yet. But that story is a completely different part of my brain set. That I want to tell that tale. It's a more absurdist thing than like say the mainstream Hero Unlimited universe, which is more straightforward, adventure comics and stuff.
Right. Because I remember, when you were talking about that you really had a good time putting that together.
Well. Yeah, that Hollywood Offenders was fantastic. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I wouldn't do, that's the thing about it. I wouldn't do any of this stuff if I wasn't having a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to do. It's not a lot of pressure. I've been hired as a writer for, besides just screenwriting, been hired as a writer to do other people's comics and writing it. And that's fun to do, whatever. Play in someone else's, sandbox. And that's always cool. But there's still a little pressure there. When you're doing your own thing, it's like, look, I have no one to answer to except me,
Right.
And then my standards are maybe high, but maybe they're not as crazy as someone else's.
Right. Absolutely. Now, so talk to us a little bit about, as well as you mentioned, like Omegan Chronicles can be found. People can go to your website and buy it. How long did it take you to get this 230-page graphic novel together?
All right. Well, I mean, it goes back. So I wrote the first chapter. The very first words I wrote in this book was probably in 1998. So, it's like 25 years ago that I wrote this. And I mean, I've got notebook after notebook, filling things up. I have, I've had notebook after notebook of ideas. And so I finally wrote the first script in 1998 and hired Rodolfo in 1999 and had some of the first artwork done around, 1999 and 2000. This book began way back then. It was a long-term thing. And I've been financing it just slowly.
Is it set up as an anthology, or is it like set up as in chapters? Like it's a full-fledged story that you can kind of follow.
Omegan Chronicles is a full-fledged story. It's set up in chapters. There's 6 individual chapters throughout each. Now, so the story is about a man who needs to learn how to care and needs to learn that he needs people to help him. It's for him. That's the story. Now, the plot involves the same man, Francisco the Super Green, returning to the planet Omega to find his missing friend, the king of Omega, Red Skew, who's been kidnapped by a mad god, Spectrum. That's the plot. So he has to plot. He goes around the planet, assembling a team of, much to his chagrin, because really he just wants to find his friend. But he assembles this team around him, which he eventually understands is why he's able to find his eventual goal and find King Red Skew.
And as you mentioned too, this book, you did it on Kickstarter, and
on Kickstarter. Yeah, it was fulfilled. We just needed enough so I could finish off paying the letter and and building a small audience. I mean, that's the thing that's the great thing about Kickstarter is I have like some of my books that have tons of supporters. Other ones like this I think we only had 25, but it was still enough to get our minimums done.
Right.
And and the cool thing about this book is one of our big supporters is he's a friend of mine too, so I can't just say that just supports this book. But the horror director Mike Flanagan was very supportive of this book, and he contributed, and he offered to promote it, so it was good that way.
There's a ton. I'm like, looking at this, looking at your Kickstarter, that when you had it on here, you had a ton of rewards. This was a really a good deal for those that were able to grab a hold of it. So talk to us a little bit about the main characters that you have in Omegan Chronicles. You did mention.
So that's just it. So the main character's name is Francisco the Super Green, which he hates. He hates that name because it was put upon him as a child because his powers came in through this experiment. It's called the Super Green experiments. So he was stuck with that name, and he's known throughout the galaxy as that name. So you'll see throughout the adventures how salty he is when people approach him as Super Green. He keeps saying, no, my name's Francisco, and it's like to much no avail, So he's the lead. He's my, he's my alter ego, I guess you'd say throughout it. I mean, all these characters are some aspect of myself. There's Alishon the sorceress, who's his second his second in command, I guess you would say. She comes along. She has sorcery powers. She says super ego to his id. She's more level headed. Then there's Gright the Rogue. We have Tix Me on the Ferry. We have Ronval, who's a very religious character who views Super Green as a religious figure, and that's much to the chagrin of Super Green and much to the laughter of Alishon and Gright, because they know Super Green being a non-religious person. So it's funny that he becomes a person. Limrak the Bold. So there's all these characters that all come together throughout. Through each chapter focuses on a different area of Omega. So what's happening is there's a racial civil war going on Omega since Redskew the king was kidnapped, so it left a vacuum, and within this vacuum, his mad uncle Arjuna decides to take power, and he's a blue Omegan, and it starts a racial civil war between blue and red Omegans for power on Omega. Now there are green Omegans, and there are other races of Omegans also, but they're not as powerful as these two sects that are going at each other. So that's the background of what Super Green has found himself in as he quests to find his missing friend.
It seems as though, like, just knowing about your other previous IPs and the work that you do, you seem to really gravitate towards telling very personal stories with epic operas happening in the background.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just it. There always, when you're writing, there's your personal problem, the character hero's personal problem, and there's a world problem. You know what I mean? And one has to influence the other, or reflect the other. So that's usually how I think about when I'm writing something, is go from that aspect. It's like writing. It's like, I tell people you want to write with a beginning in mind. I mean, you may not get to that ending, but you want to write with the ending in mind. You want to have an idea. Like look, I wrote this book over 25 years. It's like my original manuscript's completely different than what it ended up being, because things change in the world that I may want to make comments on, or I changed as a person, or whatever it was, and that influenced everything I was doing in my writing. But the most fun I have writing is Bovinely, because during that I'm using that as it's very political, but subtly so. It's one of those things where I can make comments on what's happening in the world at the time.
And so, do you, when you reread some of your older work, do you see yourself through the eyes of your younger version, or do you see it through your older self and say, what the heck was I thinking when I wrote this?
Well, it's so funny. It's like, because I know a lot of people look back in their old writing and are kind of cringeworthy or whatever. And I look at some of the stuff and I say it is, one of the things that I wasn't, it's something I had to learn as a writer. I was too verbose. So if you read my early writing, it's just a lot of people talking and a lot of that, because I was thinking, I felt like I had to fill silences. And what I learned as a comic book writer is, like, it's okay to have panels without writing. There's, you can get it across just by, it's a visual medium, so you don't have to do that, So I definitely learned to be a much better writer, for comics. As I've been doing it all along, and that's why once again, going back to Bovine League, why I'm so happy with that, because it's encompasses the best of everything I've done so far.
Right. Okay. And do you kind of see this also, the Omegan Chronicles, as almost a homage to the world you've created as well?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's Omegan Chronicles is an homage to, like I like to put that, but it's an homage not to that, but it's an homage to, like, every adventure comic I did, I've read, and every fantasy book I read. It's me just swishing them all together and seeing what the hell came out on the other side.
So, what advice would you give to some of the comic creators out there who are just like, what would you do if you see somebody who was talking, was like, Andre, I got a part-time job here, and I can't afford a comic artist. What advice would you give someone who is just, like, at that verge of, like, just thinking, I can't do this anymore?
The number one thing that I tell people is perseverance. Because why? Because if you quit, you're not going to make it at all, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. So you can't give up. I mean, if you're a guy, say you're making, I don't know, you make $500 a week, right? And your bills, you have to spend $300 of that towards your bills until you're living. Take 40 of that or 50 of that a week, and it'll hurt you in the end if you don't end up with anything, like old man like me with no savings. But instead of putting that $50 to your savings, if your wife will let you, or your husband lets you, or whomever your spouse is, you know what I mean? If you can take that $50 and put it towards your book, each week, that'll give you about $250 at the end of the month that you could put toward an artist. And depending on which artist you get, that could be 2 pages, that could be 3 pages of artwork. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's just that's why you got perseverance. You can't quit. It's like you. Right. And I say and that's one of the things that doing indie comics, because hopefully you'll be selling them for a while. Hopefully these are things for a while. When you're writing things, you have to write in mind that someone's going to be reading this 4 or 5 years from now also. Right. So when you're telling a story, if you're telling something that's happening you're commenting on something that's happening right now in time and space, you're using, slang from this era or whatever, you may look back in your writing and say like, oh, that's kind of right. rough. So it's something, that's one of the reasons, it's easy for me because I write fantasy futuristic stuff, so right. I'm not tied to anything that's actually culturally here. Now, I wrote a book called The Stone Age about a bongster I worked on Melrose back in the late 90s. And that was talking about that period, But like there's there are things in that book that are very just from when I wrote the book and 2000.
Looking at it from the long-term view, make your stories evergreen, right? So that they can be read in the next, as you say,
it's like
years from now.
It's like as a writer, one of the things, it's a joke amongst writers, screenwriters, but it's like, get a Christmas movie. If you can write a Christmas movie, that thing will play for the next 20 years, and you'll be getting royalties forever. That's, I mean, it's funny, but it's true.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I'm kind of curious as well, as you brought that up. Do you have like in one of your list of to-dos, do you actually have a like Christmas
That's
themed?
So funny. Well, it's my friend Ron and I. Hey, shout out to Ron. He's off to Japan. I hope you have a great trip, brother. We wrote a Christmas story called "A Match Made at Christmas," and it was one of these things where I wanted to pitch. We tried to write it like literally as simple as we could. So we wrote the script, and then I went to through some friends. I got it over to Hallmark. You got the people to look at it. And I got notes back, and of course, what do they say? It's too smart. It's like, but it's like I try to write it as simple as I can. What do you mean? It's like no, it's, too many character developments going on. You need the characters to be very simple for this. But that's just for that particular streamer or whatever. Right. But like, I mean, look at Die Hard. People fight over that it's a Christmas movie this day, and I'm of the thing that it is a Christmas movie. It takes place at Christmas. It's driven by Christmas, so it's a Christmas movie.
Right. Yeah.
So.
So how many rewrites did the Omegan Chronicles take, as you said, when you started writing that?
Oh, yeah. Lord, I wrote that thing about probably 5, 6, 7 times. I've written, and because it's been over so many years, I've, so I wrote maybe the first 4 chapters right away back in the late 90s. And then I finished it off probably around 2006. All the chapters. Then I went back and I completely trashed a lot of stuff I didn't like when I wrote, and rewrote and started rewriting a lot of it, after that. So what's hard to remember, even looking at my notes, is the mindset I was in when I originally created it. Right. It's hard to actually go back to that. So it's like, I feel like people haven't commented, and people have said it seems fine. To me, it's a little bit disjointed, when I read it myself, because I'm like, oh, well.
So where do you see yourself? What advice would you give people who want to write a superhero story? Like, because a lot of you have powers,
right? Do
you determine personality before powers, or do you determine I like this superpower, now I'm going to create a person for it? How does that work?
Well, for instance, with the Super Green, he's a pastiche. He's Superman. My comment of him. So he has those characters. So his powers are pretty well established within the way people understand power set. So his character is more based on personality. Like I wrote a whole biography about his background. He's a self-educated man, that didn't finish school because he was forced into the limelight as a superhero as a teenager. So he has a certain set of values that he puts on that he believes the rest of the world should follow, even though I believe he's a bit naive about that. But he writes that. Now for the Bovine League, for instance, that was completely different. I wrote each character around that as around a particular archetype. So there's the everyman, the professor, just all these different archetypes. So each one of those characters, their powers came from their personality, if that makes any sense.
Right. Okay.
And now, like the rest of them, I mean, like you're looking at the story now, there's a bunch of characters on there. There's Tixme on the fairy. She's a fairy princess from the grasslands of Omega. We'll learn more about her world, her area of the world in Omegan Wars when that comes up. Yeah, so it's just a great book. I really think a lot. I think it's a fun book. It's a good adventure. It's a graphic novel that's worth the money. There's some great writing in there, not just of mine, but at the end of each chapter, I have a story like the end of chapter 1 that you read about the Crimsonian prophecy and where that came from. And then the end of chapter 2, you hear about the Blue Omegan Codex and how their powers came, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So throughout the book, at the end of each chapter, there's supplemental material.
And it's like you say, it's 230 pages, man. Yeah. That is epic.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it really, it's I think it's worth people's, worth the price of admission.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah. So congratulations on hitting that too. That's amazing. And so if people then, Andre, if people want to learn more about Hero Unlimited or learn more about you, Andre, what's the best place they could go to?
Well, I mean, you can go to the website at herounlimited.com and you can see all of the books there. So it needs to be updated more often about what I'm doing, like under the media, and coming soon needs to be re-updated because a lot of that stuff's already done. Like Bovine League's done, Psychedelic Detective web series, which is there's a work in progress. If you're interested in watching, go to YouTube, look up Psychedelic Detective, and you can watch the first episode. It's not very good, but it's what I did. Omegan Chronicles now is done. Bristol's Voice Galactic Facts is in working, and then the way back burner is George Harrison in space, which is one of my crazier ideas. But the famed Beetle getting kidnapped by aliens.
That's awesome. So people can go to
HeroUnlimited.com to find that out, or I'm on social media of at RedSkew, or so at some social media it's at RedSkew, others it's at red_skew. But you can find me there on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can just look me up that way.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, it's great. It's great talking to you, Andre.
All right, take care, brother.
I just got one of those. So here's something new, Andre. Since we talked last, I'm wearing glasses now. So
all the time,
or just not all the time. I like it's the readers, but they're also. I have enough where I still have kind of like 20/20 vision a bit, but it's like now just as soon as I hit 46, all of a sudden, I didn't realize how bad my eyesight was really until I actually started wearing glasses.
I know, man. I was the same way. It's so funny. I was the exact same way. And when I started thinking, I thought it was because I was high. I started thinking I was like, I guess if it's getting high or reading, I guess I'm gonna have to give up getting high because I love to read. So and then one day I was like, I was at the farmer's stand, just like, let me put some of those glasses on. As soon as I put them on, I was like, oh my god. I can actually read. Oh my god.
All right, and let me hit. And did you see though, Andre, that you're on my intro reel?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Yeah, well, I think this is my fourth. I think this is my fourth appearance.
I know you've officially made friend of the show from your last appearance. And now
I remember you telling me that. That was really cool. I like that when you said. I think you sent a text out to me and a couple of the other people.